Bedoya, California. We're here in the Institute of the Americas Malibu group. We are actually with some other people in the room. It's our first ever hybrid event. We are delighted to be here. Debating Energy Security and Climate Action is the title of this panel and our roundtable. Indeed, it is hybrid. We're delighted to have alongside us here at the table Jessica Bedoya, who hopefully most of you just heard from in her keynote address. She is the Chief of Staff and the Chief Strategy Officer at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. And she had the hardship duty of traveling out to La Jolla to join us here.
I know, it was definitely hardship.
It's a little chilly in the morning, huh?
I don't know. I would much rather be in Washington. Definitely, where there's no view.
Yeah.
And there's no sun.
We're also here at the table with my colleague who launched an amazing report from the Institute of the Americas on national government contributions, NDCs. I invite you to check that out. Tania, Miranda, live from the Institute.
Morning.
And because this is a hybrid panel, we have with us from Mexico City, Carlos de Regules. He's a partner at Deloitte, former founding director of ASEA, the hydrocarbon safety and upstream regulator in Mexico, longtime environmental funcionario at Chemex. Carlos, I'm going to take the word that you're there. I've got no monitor here. I'm going to wave to the camera and hope you're there.
I am here.
Online is José Luis Manzano. Is José Luis there? Okay. We got José Luis? Fantastic. José Luis Manzano is the chairman of Integra Capital. He's a board member of the Institute of the Americas, longtime steering committee and supporter of the Energy and Sustainability Program at the Institute. And Integra Capital has investments in just about every segment of the economy we're going to talk about today, from critical minerals to electricity to oil and gas as well. And Decio Oddone from Rio de Janeiro. He's also a longtime supporter, former steering committee member, former board member. I'll wave to Decio in Rio. Hope he's there.
Very good. How are things?
I take it Decio's there.
Yes. Yeah. Always a pleasure.
We have a hybrid panel, ladies and gentlemen. Way! Well, Decio also is well known for his role in restarting and jumpstarting, reinvigorating the upstream activity in Brazil at AMP when he was tapped and for several years led the upstream regulator AMP in Brazil. But I also want Decio to be part of this because he's written a lot lately about this topic of debating energy security and climate action. And I think it's important to have a pan-regional view, and Decio brings that along with our other panelists, Carlos and José Luis. I think José Luis is joining us from DC. I forget, he's hard to keep up with where he is, what time zone, what city, but he's with us. That's all that matters. So just a note of introduction. We all know Glasgow's coming. I mean, you'd have to be living under a rock not to realize that the COP26 meeting is about to kick off in Glasgow, Scotland here in a few weeks. We heard from Jessica, there's a need to find and encounter and continue to support economic activity in the region through financing. You set forth a host of ways that the Inter-American Development Bank is trying to support financing for the energy transition and this effort to move faster and deeper on climate action. But also we talked a little bit about in the previous session, just the dependency and how many countries of Latin America from fiscal terms, from energy security terms, how important fossil fuels are. There was the question that actually wasn't for me, but that's okay.
Are you sure?
About natural gas and the role of natural gas. Natural gas is hugely important in the region. Energy security, it's hugely important in markets like Argentina in terms of revenue, public budgets. So that's part of what we want to put on the table. And as if there weren't enough issues to talk about, we have a major energy crisis underway. Europe continues to struggle. China is struggling. So this need to balance climate action, the emergency, with energy security, making sure your citizens have sustainable and affordable energy supply. That's the key. That's the key here. So that's what we're going to talk about. It's a lot to take on in 1 hour. Innovation and technology are critical. You talked about the need for clear-eyed and straightforward regulation and policy environments. Absolutely. So let's get right to it. I want to go right to Carlos de Regules, who always loves to set the scene on these major topics. He's worked on so many angles. Carlos, let me go to you, but let's frame it in the first question we want to put on the table, and it comes right back to what's happening in Europe, and I think it's a very useful lens to start our conversation. Is this another boom bust of the energy sector? I mean, we've all lived through so many boom busts, or is this surge in price an indicator of just the volatility we're going into when we try and balance a faster, more aggressive posture with climate At the same time, we need to have that energy security guaranteed. So over to you, Carlos, and we look forward to your remarks to kick us off here. Yeah, we hear you.
Right, perfect. Okay, well, very, very nice to almost be there this year. Hopefully, next year's La Jolla conference will be in person. And I just want to tell you that I'm thrilled to be sharing this panel with Jessica, with Tania, with Jose Luis, with Decio, of course, with my good friend Jeremy. And I should also say that I remember Decio from my previous life as a regulator. We were both regulators. He was in Brazil, I was in Mexico, when being a regulator in Mexico actually mattered. So those were good times. And that's the only unpolitical mention I will make. Let me try to kick off the conversation, Jeremy. And moving away from the practicalities of climate action into a more sort of a philosophical approach, just to set the tone for the conversation. People like me that we've been in the oil and gas industry, in the energy industry for the last 20 years, we have this sort of received wisdom, or we've been telling this story to ourselves that actions to address the climate emergency would somehow jeopardize energy security. That's the truth we've been living with. And this may be somehow true in the immediate term, but it is actually the opposite when you look a little, you take a little bit of a further vision into the future. Uncommon wisdom hints towards the fact that harnessing the climate threat will result in a more dependable energy system. Jessica Bedoya just some minutes ago told us that climate change is the issue of our generation. I think we all can agree on that. And incidentally, I think that in order to address this correctly, we need to think of it in this way, in a different way, and we need to clarify the expectations that we put on the energy system. What are the fundamental attributes that we need from the global energy system for humankind? And we've done this before. The energy system must provide what is required from it, not the opposite. And these requirements evolve in time. 70,000 years ago, the energy system needed to be harnessable. So Homo sapiens needed to get a hold of fire and animal power, literally putting a harness on it. So the energy system, in order to service humankind, needed to be harnessable. During the Industrial Revolution, the energy system, in order to service humankind, needed to be scalable. So coal needed to be there where industry required it, where the trains, where the vapor motors required it. During World War II and all the period till the end of the Cold War, the energy system needed to be geopolitically controllable in order to service somehow humankind. During the era of globalization, what we have required from the energy system has been to be available and cheap. And this may have come to an end. What the Generation X paradigm on the energy system, that's Generation X is pretty much everybody, probably except for Tania, sitting in this panel. Our sort of paradigm is energy needs to be reliable, needs to be affordable, and needs to be sustainable. What sustainable means? Let's just keep it that way and assume that it will be sustainable. And I think that's no longer tenable. I think if we ask the young people that are just beginning their adulthood, and that's Generation Z, what's their paradigm for the energy system? I think words like viable, would be there. Words like dependable would be there. Words like fair would be there. So, and probably it helps trying to put some definitions on those terms. Viable, consistent with 1.5 degrees Celsius. Dependable, with a solid solid regulations and institutions behind the energy system, not just market forces. Fair, that reduces inequalities, social inequalities. Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN, has put it very, very clearly. Climate change is a direct existential threat. I also think it is a civilizing change opportunity. And I guess my invitation for today would be to challenge our comfortable discussion zone and think with perhaps 20 years ahead with hindsight. What are the uncomfortable questions that we should have asked back in 2021 in La Jolla conference? You know, is natural gas really a bridge to a transition? And if so, when do we declare that we have reached the other side? What about renewable energies, necessarily mineral supply chain and its social and environmental impacts? Who takes care of copper, lithium, cobalt exploitation and their social and environmental footprint? Who and when do we address oil and gas legacy issues, economic, labor, environmental? So my message, just beginning this conversation, would be that we need to discuss not what the current energy system can deliver, but rather what humankind needs from the energy system going forward. So with that, I would leave it to the rest of the panelists, and thank you for your attention. You are muted. Jeremy, you're muted. Carlos Fernandez is muted, right?
Hello. Okay. Challenge issued, challenge received. And let me immediately pass the hot potato to Decio Oddone. Decio, you've written a lot lately. I'll summarize it as more energy, less carbon. We know doubling of demand of electricity, the amount of critical minerals need tripling according to the IEA net zero of 2050. More energy, less carbon. How do we do it? Decio Oddone, over to you.
No. Thank you, Jeremy, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you, José Luis, Carlos, and Jessica. Carlos mentioned about good old days when both were regulators. And I'm back 20 years from today. Good old days when we started visiting the Institute during Jeff Davido's period in La Jolla. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here in this first ever, I believe, hybrid panel that the Institute has ever implemented. So it's a double pleasure. I think that we are seeing now a period of volatility and extreme volatility we have seen this last few weeks and days as a result of the changes that we had in the environment for the industry. If we go back a few decades, we remember that the cycles in the industry, oil price cycles, used to be long. We had the first oil crisis in 73, the second in 79, and the price went up until 86. So it was about 13 years of price going up. Then we have the price crash in 86, and price went depressed until the end of the 90s. So another 13, 14 years of price going down. And then they start picking up again in the beginning of the 2000s. If you forget about the 2 years, 3 years during the Lehman Brothers economic crisis, price picked up from 2000 to 2014, 14 years. And since then, as a result, initially of the shale revolution in the US, and now I believe as a result of the impact that the pandemic had on demand, we are facing very short price cycles. And as a result, I think we will see in front of us more volatility. And more volatility will bring more difficulties for companies to approve long-term projects. And if we have long-term projects, we don't have long-term projects, we have problems with demand. So I believe that the industry is entering a new era of volatility.
Okay. Thank you, Decio. That was truly on point. For our next question, we would like to shift topics a little bit, and this question will go to José Luis Manzano. And we'd like for you to talk about briefly on how you think countries can manage this balancing act of more energy security, but at the same time following their international climate pledges and this green recovery mantra for countries in the region.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I was listening to Decio. I was thinking exactly on how different it is for the planet as a whole, for regions, and for countries. It's like 3 levels. When you go to the planet as a whole, the challenge we have lies on international coordination and big polluters to stick to their word and deliver on their promises. Then when you go to regions, it moves to energy security and how you guarantee your supply. When it goes to energy security and how you guarantee your supply, you have energy-rich regions that will have no problem, and you have energy-poor regions that, unless they do big investment, they will have problems. For example, you go to some conference in Europe, and it looks like we are entering Truman Show. Everything is perfect. Everything is green, and you just fly 1 hour. And you get into European countries that 60% of their energy is coming from coal. So there is investment. Then in the US, you see a big commitment. So to me, is a set of tools. One tool is nearshoring. With nearshoring and international coordination, you can almost guarantee your supply unless there are disruptions in the supply chain. Then in decarbonization is big investment, and big investment will require government incentive. I think US, Europe, and China are working on the incentive. If Latin America doesn't deploy the incentive, Latin America will not catch up on it. And then how you deal with volatility, it's a problem. Volatility plays well for the very clever or for the very rich, and play very bad for the stupid and the poor. So, and in some countries, you put a combination of being poor and being stupid, volatility kills you. So so I think you have to develop market tools to deal with volatility. And for that, you also need more international cooperation. So unless the international cooperation on energy supplies and dealing with volatility is deployed, you only have a strong cooperation on the supply side, from the side of OPEC. And that will increase the pressure on the non-producing countries. Yesterday, LNG was trading in Japan at 35. I had a call with one of the brokers that we work with, and it was 35. And that's absolutely crazy. Imagine if you put the world system running on $35 million BTU LNG, it will not work. Nobody can pay for it. And only last year we had minus oil. So all this volatility has to be addressed, and it will have to be addressed with government money. And how you address it? Moving to renewable and batteries. I think countries have to rely more in renewables and batteries. Only renewables and battery, and nuclear will have to play a role. Nuclear will have to play a role in supplying base energy. So I think we have to be prepared for extreme volatility, winners and losers, and without international cooperation, some countries will behave and try to get to the 2030, 2050 goals, and some countries will keep burning coal.
Thank you, José Luis, for your very comprehensive and candid response. Jessica, we'll turn to you for our next question. And you already spoke a little bit about this on your keynote and about working together with the private sector, but we'd like to add on it a little bit on what you think are the key ways that we can foster more coordinated action with global financial institutions, with credit rating agencies, with the private sector and governments, so that countries can truly leverage the new climate economy.
Thanks for the question. And actually, I was just thinking about a conversation that I had while I was at the UN General Assembly not too long ago, although my days are getting mixed up. So it feels like I was there just last week, but I wasn't. And we were talking about exactly this. How do you involve the private sector? And I think I started the conversation by saying that, first of all, we need to admit as an institution what was just laid out, governments can't do it all. And we can't do it all as multinationals. We just can't. MDBs, we can own a part of the solution, but we can't provide the full solution to make it sustainable. We have to work with partners. And so a little bit of what I said earlier holds very true, in that if we can first admit that we're not the only actor here, that's the first step to resolving the issue and accepting we have a problem we need to solve. So how do we engage? We have to be open and honest about the gaps that we can't fill. And so what we've been doing at the bank is outlining exactly what sectors we want to work in that we know we don't have the expertise. The IDB has amazing expertise, but we can't know it all. And we can't be creative every day of the week either. So what we've done, as I outlined in the keynote, in terms of being able to identify the 5 areas where the bank wants to prioritize, I think has helped a lot in terms of conversations with the private sector, because now they have a much clearer concept of what we, IDB, wants to do in the region. So we've accepted we can't solve the whole problem on ourselves. We've accepted we needed a clearer agenda. So then what's the next step? The next step is actually figuring out what financial tools are out there on the markets. I think we've had really great conversations when we were in New York with financial institutions to say, how can we bring you in? And a lot of the fruit of those conversations we're starting to see now in terms of, well, hey, the IDBs, it's just a matter of knowing, what do we want to do? We want to de-risk. A lot of institutions didn't know we wanted to get into this. So I've learned over that experience that we need to talk more, use these platforms to say, hey, the IDB, we want you to use de-risking mechanisms. We need to be more creative. So how can we do that? We want to work with organizations and investors to see how we can work in venture capital. That's an area where we would like to leverage even more resources. We want to work in Mexico, where we've got a lot of incubators that are now becoming unicorns, and we want to do more. How do we bring that to scale? I think a lot of this is we need to, as an institution, be better. And I said this in my keynote, and it's becoming a trend, about communicating the gaps for us. So we can provide debt finance, we can provide project finance, we can provide technical cooperation. But we need to mobilize more, because to make it sustainable, we have to take a step back and have the investors who can be there over the long term, who should be there over the long term, come in. So those are just a compilation very quickly of the steps in our thinking of how we can engage more with international institutions, with international financial institutions. I think more than anything also, because they too want to have a benefit, we need to bring something to the table. So it can't just be a take situation, we need to give. And what we give to a lot of these financial institutions is our reputation. We walk into countries hand in hand. If you're nervous about making an investment, what we've been saying is come in with us. We'll give you the guarantee. If you're nervous about this, we'll work with governments to make the environment better and safer for you to walk in the door. And that's been a message that's been resonating quite a bit with future partners, because I don't think they had heard that before. We want partners to know you're not going in alone. We're going in together. We're going to own the problem together. We're going to own the solution together. And that's getting us some traction. And I think that's why we've been having some success with our private sector partnerships with Rockefeller. They're seeing us take those steps of admitting this is where we need the work to be done. And this is the tool that we have, but we could do a lot more if you work with us. And so we have no shame in saying we want to work with all of you.
No shame is a great thing. We are delighted to be a partner going forward with the IDB, the Institute of the Americas, amongst a lot of the other stakeholders you've mentioned. I have a bunch of ideas, but I want to come back to volatility because I think that's a very important theme here in trend. And I want to go back to Carlos de Regules. He's our management consultant on the panel today. And Carlos, you issued a challenge, so let me issue one back to you. In a couple of minutes, lay out for us from your management consultant practice and expertise, what would you advise a client in terms of managing volatility? Carlos?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So I think the first advice, I think, and concentrating on the oil and gas industry, the oil and gas sector, is probably you need to take ownership of the full value chain greenhouse gas stewardship. You need to own that responsibility, not just mitigate greenhouse gas emissions from your operations, but also take into consideration what happens with your supply chain and what happens with the use of your products. So issues like methane emissions control, that's a must. That's an absolutely must for the oil and gas sector. Issues like zero flaring, I mean, that should be already in the past, okay, but it's not. So those are two key levers to own the whole value chain of greenhouse gases in the oil and gas. That's not sufficient. You need to take a look at what happens again with your supply chain and with the use of your products. If your natural gas is being used to produce power, you need to co-own the responsibility of those of CO2 coming out of power generators. And you need to heavily invest along with your clients downstream in CCUS technology in order to harness those emissions, right? Carbon capture and use and sequestration. That's for the oil and gas and coal industries. Concerning renewables are having a good day. But the renewable industry will eventually be faced with also the carbon footprint and in general the environmental footprint and social footprint of its value chain. In order for the renewable energy sector to gain space and market share, we need to address reliability of supply. And that goes through storage systems, so batteries. And as I was saying in the introductory note, what's happening with lithium and cobalt and nickel and manganesium exploitation matters not tomorrow, it matters today. So there are challenges not only for the traditional energy system, fossil fuel based, but also for the renewable system. And taking into account that responsibility, that stewardship, will only make for better business plans that are robust and resilient in any scenario in the future. That's essentially what I would advise.
So the critical minerals issues is something that I want to come back to, but for right now, I do want to invite Decio and eventually Jose Luis to comment as well. But Decio, let me frame it just a little bit more for you. In terms of this volatility question, you're the CEO of a company in Brazil producing oil and gas. What are you doing also in terms of ESG and net zero commitments? And so I'm very interested in sort of your response to managing volatility. But managing volatility as the CEO of a company that also is probably trying to develop its own ESG and sort of net zero targets and objectives, right?
Oh yeah, that's really important, and we are seeing the impact of all these ESG issues on the industry, especially on the financial side. But I think that one of the most important conclusions that we must take into consideration when planning ahead is that most of the comments that we hear about the energy transition is kind of naive We will make the transition. I have no doubt on that. We must do that, but we must do it with more energy, not with less offer of energy. So oil and gas, they will remain important in the future for the mankind. We need to increase the energy integration. We need to include, in terms of energy, we have billions of people in the world who have not access to energy. In the past 20 years, 1 billion people had access to energy, and 70% of that was energy generated by the use of fossil fuels. So we cannot just disconnect from the fossil fuels and believe that we will have a transition. So in terms of planning for a company like mine, what we see is that major companies, and the largest oil companies, especially the European ones, they are shifting their portfolio and investing heavily on renewables. This movement gives opportunity for smaller companies, independent companies like mine, to take over and to produce oil and gas in fields that are no longer interesting for this large company. And success will be there for the ones who will be able to produce at lower cost, low lifting costs, low producing costs, and also producing with lower emissions. So the challenge for the companies in our environment is to keep producing and to increase efficiency. In the past, efficiency for the industry was just reducing costs. And now efficiency is a broader concept. It includes also being efficient in terms of carbon reduction.
So there's a lot of discussion about, going forward, obviously we see different projections depending upon whether it's BP, IEA, but there will be an amount of oil that's demanded going into even 2030, 2040, 2050. But your point is critical. Not all barrels will be the same. So what is the advantage for a producing country in terms of that low carbon, I hate to say it, but a low carbon barrel? I know it's a bit, a bit of oxymoronic, but I think it's a valid point. And that's going to be part of this equation that I think we're not sure how we figure this out. But help us figure it out, Jose Luis Manzano, and take the volatility question. But at the same time, I want to pose to you a similar framing in the sense of you manage, and Integra Capital has a wide range of companies in its portfolio: electricity generation, critical minerals exploitation, oil and gas, upstream, all over the region, trading, as you noted earlier. So volatility, how do you manage that across your portfolio companies? But how are you, as the chairman, across such a disparate number of companies and segments, implementing ESG and corporate and environmental sustainability governance?
Well, let us start from the end. On ESG, you have to have a commitment at the top. It's the only way. It's a bottom-up. Well-established organizations have resistance. So you have to take the commitment from the top. There are things that are easier than others. Like, for example, incorporate women is easier because the qualified women are out there. So it's just you crash the organization, you get the women up. Is there? That's the resources is there. Then in governance, you just try to follow best practices, and you get there. But then when you go to the environment, some of the activities are on itself a contradiction, like you say, an oxymoron, like oil and gas. And then there you face a portfolio that include oil and gas, and you can do two things. You walk away, so that simplifies your life. You walk away, but somebody takes it. And somebody takes it because oil and gas will keep playing a role until 2040, I believe, at least until 2040. So we go through the same dilemma that everybody. We say, okay, let's get rid of oil. Let's sell the oil. Then they say, no, let's be responsible. Okay, so we try to do more gas than oil. And maybe in 3 years, 5 years, we get out of oil and get into gas. But somebody will be producing that oil. So there, the only way is to look at the carbon print of each barrel. And some barrels will have to stay in the ground forever, and some barrels will be produced. And I think that we have to do with taxes. You will have to use taxes. It's not only incentive, but taxes. You will have to use taxes for the heavy carbon additional or production carbon on the bad barrels. That is, I don't see other way. And then how you deal with the volatility is the industry has developed resilience. Many survive, many die. But on the consumer side, the volatility excludes people unless the government get in the middle of it. And we all see the price of gas. But if you look at the price of electricity in Spain, it's a result of a very bad exercise of creating an inefficient industry based on subsidies. When you create the industry based on subsidies, and then when you take the subsidies out and you think the government will not pay anymore and the consumer should take all the costs, it doesn't work. The consumer cannot take all the costs. So I think the countries will have to deploy policies in which the vulnerable part of the population are subsidized and the one with the money pay for the total cost of the molecules or the electron. So I think you will have a need for more regulation if you want to keep people getting into the energy pot, and you will have to get controls and you will have to get taxes on carbon. And we'll have to pay for it.
Thank you, Jose Luis. We'd like to turn to you, Jessica, to wrap up this topic about volatility and ESGs. And if you can, after that, maybe you shift also a little bit into the topic of energy access in the region. How can you help bring investment in that topic, and doing so with a low carbon footprint as we're trying to do this energy transition as well?
Sure.
And it will be taxes. It will be taxes. No taxes, no discipline.
I love it.
Carbon tax.
We at the IDB don't support higher taxes. We just support better taxation. Better taxation.
Pricing carbon. No one likes the word tax.
Yeah, no, the industry must be prepared for carbon tax.
I think we've heard a lot right now from my fellow panelists in terms of how do you address volatility. I think the key themes for us, what the trends that we have seen at the bank, is that if, absent political will, we won't get very far. So our goal, through our traditional means of supporting governments in terms of public sector reforms, is how to build the political will to advance the ESG efforts. I think we've done a whole host of these types of projects in terms of improving governance, improving ESG approaches and through financial intermediaries and in the sector directly on our private sector arm through IDB Invest and IDB Lab, our innovation laboratory. But on the public sector, there's a lot more that we can do. And we're looking for the space to do that, because I completely agree, wholesale without political will, we won't advance much further. If I could just touch really quickly on the issue of subsidies, I think, and it ties into my last point on energy access. I think the issue of subsidies is a huge, huge component of this. And I actually was just reading this morning, right early, an article talking about how the Europeans are trying to come together to figure out how to manage the crisis today that they're facing, and how they're going to ensure access to energy for their citizens through the provision of subsidies that, by the way, they can't afford. And I think what we've seen in the region is that subsidies are the only way that people are able to get access to energy. And I think this is another part of the political will component that perhaps is deemed controversial to mention. But I think that a lot of these countries, and I've seen it firsthand when I was trying to promote energy integration in my policymaking world experience, that there's a lot of entrenched interests in a lot of these countries in the region that are almost prohibitive in terms of either bringing in new investment, fresh investment, turning to renewables, promoting ESG standards, because it just doesn't conform to their interests and their bottom line. We see it in the ever-present country of Guatemala, where energy access is one of the leading problems and reasons for poverty in a lot of these rural areas. What we at the bank are doing is trying to help. We actually just approved a project where we'll be financing a transition from the use of wood, if you can imagine, wood-burning stoves, to using gas. Okay, is gas sustainable? No, but it's way better than burning wood for the environment, for their health in the communities, and for durability in terms of sustainability. So, when we're talking about subsidies and when we're talking about ESG standards, let's just call the problem what it is: political will, a lack of political will, and competition over control of a resource that really should have universal access for all. And so we at the bank recognize that this is the challenge, and we're not afraid to confront these challenges and say what they are. What we need to do as a development institution is approach it in a way that is supportive of and complementary to what governments do want to do, but also highlighting those gaps so that we can fill them or bring in the private sector. Obviously, it would be very helpful if the private sector in these countries would take a stance on these issues publicly. And I think these platforms are helpful in terms of at least raising the issue. I think that going to the point, and I'll end on this, that I would love to hear more from the panel, or when we talk about other issues toward the end of this, on the issue of taxation that we're talking about and carbon credits. A lot of the trend that we're seeing now is an ask for debt for nature swaps, and how that could help further. I think that is an issue that we need to keep developing because it's very nuanced, it's very sophisticated. But I think that's also part of the conversation that we're having today in terms of what are the ways that we can work and bring in people who are in the sector, diversify the risk, and how we can bring in that private sector that's so entrenched to let them see that there's a benefit to working on the issues.
Perfect. And let's just go right to the other panelists. I mean, I think the equity issue we've talked about, and the equity issue in unfortunately Latin America's historical legacy with inequity is absolutely part of this. And we talk about the energy access question. And to your point, the reliance on biomass in certain countries and certain areas of the region in 2021 is important. So absolutely, how to solve that. And I want to end the panel on a question on gas. But let's go to Jose Luis. He was still wanting to talk a little bit at the end of his last intervention. So, okay, Jose Luis, pricing carbon, taxation. Let's not call it taxation. Let's call it pricing carbon. What is the way forward? We had a session last week, a little small debate around the idea of an upstream tax, where instead of at the consumption level, you actually put the price of carbon at the barrel in the upstream. An idea, a new perhaps modality. But what's your thinking on this pricing carbon topic?
I think you need both tools. You need the incentive and you need the tax. And you need both things to be tradable. So the market help covering the mismatch. So thing has to be tradable, traceable, easily identified. It could be at the consumption, or it could be at the upstream level. At the end, if something is very heavily taxed or charged, it will go out of the market, and it has to be applied to big amounts of energy. So let's say you are the president of Costa Rica and you do it, you will look very cool, but you will have no impact. It has to be done in the big economies and in regions. Let's say you pick an ecologist and you do it in Argentina, it doesn't make any impact. If you do the entire Mercosur, it makes an impact. If you get the US, it makes an impact. If you get the European Union, it makes an impact. If you don't get the Chinese and the Indians to adhere to it, all our impact will be wiped out by Chinese and Indian emissions. So this is a global challenge that requires global leadership and global coordination. The pandemic didn't show much coordination. So they said now the Glasgow meeting will give us a feeling of how much of this is there. But if not, we will be doing. Some years ago, we were all scared of the greenwashing, and now I'm scared of conscious calm. So you do your effort, you go electric, you vote in a referendum in your country to have carbon prices, and you give up everything that is coming from liquid fuels or coal in your country, but and you sleep better. But that doesn't give you a guarantee against warming, against global warming, or against the effects of the global warming. You don't get a guarantee of that. You will sleep better, but still the tide will get to your home. So it's beside the carbon credits, carbon taxes, and taxes on corporation and individual efforts at country level, the need for global cooperation is huge. No global cooperation, no success. That's my point. That's my point. Everything we do at the individual level is fantastic. Everything we do at the country level is fantastic. But you know where the pollution is coming from. It's coming from everywhere, but not at the same pace.
As somebody who doesn't sleep very well, I'm all for sleeping better at night. So everything you just said, if that gets me to sleep better at night, I'm all in. I was all in anyway, but the better sleep is a lovely result. And I think, the point you're also making is just the fact that Latin America is not the global emitter, right? I mean, in terms of the emissions profile of the world, Latin America is not even 10%. I mean, the numbers vary depending upon how you analyze it, but no matter what, it's less than a tenth of global emissions from the region. And then you take out Brazil and Mexico, even less. But let me ask Decio to put his upstream regulator hat back on and talk about pricing carbon. I know that's not necessarily something that would happen at ANP, but ANP is part of the National Conselho in Brazil for Energy. What would be, take us inside a conversation as the ANP regulator of the upstream on a pricing carbon discussion in Brazil?
Well, Brazil is a kind of pioneer in pricing carbon in the transport sector. A few years ago, 2018, 2019, a program called RenovaBio was implemented by the government, which represents a kind of a carbon tax, because it gives the biofuels used for transportation, ethanol and biodiesel, an advantage in comparison with the fossil fuels. So the distribution companies, they are obliged to buy carbon certificates related to the volume of the fossil fuels that they commercialize. So it was the first step in Brazil in order to establish an incentive for the biofuels, and it's has been in place for about 2 years, and we'll see how it evolves, and we'll see other initiatives in this regard. There are some discussions on implementing something similar in the power sector, the usage of more cleaner fuels.
I mean, without putting you on the spot, is part of the transport fuel question in Brazil also the whole market pricing? I mean, anything you want to say about the role of subsidies and taxation of liquid fuels and transport in Brazil, or is that like something I'm putting you too much on the spot for?
No, I mean, prices are free in Brazil. There is a lot of discussions always when we have a volatility, high volatility and price increase. But we have a system in which prices are freely formed, and this RenovaBio certificates, they are part of the model and are fully incorporated into the system.
Volatility, right? Wow. So, okay, back to you, Carlos de Regules. Let's wrap up this conversation.
And
pricing carbon. You were with us on that segment last week where we debated the upstream tax. You obviously have already made a very strong statement with regards to methane and how companies and governments need to be more aggressive dealing with methane, but also flaring. Quickly, what's your take on pricing carbon? What do you think is an appropriate modality? How can Latin America look at this topic and embrace it or adjust it to the local jurisdiction?
Yeah, I think obviously for industry to move in one direction or the other, it needs a reliable price signal for carbon. And I link that to Jose Luis' comment on global cooperation. Absolutely. I think you cannot go regional on this. Carbon has to have a price signal globally. And again, I think energy industry is very good at meeting new challenges, complex challenges. But the energy industry needs a very clear mandate on what is expected from it. And again, I go back to my three critical characteristics of the future of the energy system. It needs to be viable in terms of it's consistent with 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature or net zero by 2050. That's clear. It has to be dependable. So it has to have solid regulations and institutions behind it. And it has to be fair. And the whole question of subsidies, taxes, has to do with the fairness of the energy system. And the whole thing on global cooperation and the need for political stewardship has to do with the dependability of the system. And of course, climate concerns that Jose Luis also mentioned have to do with the viability of the system. So again, I go back to my initial comment on we need to be clear about the mandate for the energy system, and then we can go into the specifics of it. But if we don't have a crystal clear three key issues that can shape global cooperation around it, then we can lose ourselves in the practicalities and the details of it. We need a clear lighthouse to guide us.
Thank you, Carlos. It's very interesting. The pricing mechanisms also need to reflect the true negative externalities of carbon emissions and the true positive externalities of ecosystem services, so that they actually start turning tables in this energy transition and channeling investments towards where they need to be. We want to shift gears to another topic with you, Jessica. And we want to ask about the issue of critical minerals. Well, they can be a lever for growth in the region, but of course there are technical challenges ahead, and they can also bring a high carbon footprint for the region. So we'd love for you to talk about how the IDB sees the sector being a key factor for economic growth in Latin America.
Sure, thank you for the question. I will say I was sharing earlier this morning, actually with Jeremy and with Richard too, how when I first joined the IDB, one of the first questions I had, not to think myself as very prescient in terms of these matters that we're talking about today, but because I was seeing that there was a supply chain issue that we were all going to confront in the coming 2 to 5 years, and it could be a permanent problem. And we need to be more innovative in the region in terms of what are those opportunities for investment. So when we came into the IDB, one of the first questions I asked was, well, what are we doing on critical minerals? And the response was, well, we're very risk averse because there's a big footprint issue there. We're working on our own ESG standards on the public sector side, which we already had on the private sector side. We need to strictly enforce, the environmental issues that we want to improve in these countries. We can't bring in critical minerals. So whenever someone says, well, Jessica, this is a problem, I say, well, let's find a solution. And so I've been working with our team to map out what we have in the region that could be an opportunity. Because at the end of the day, we're producing, and I said this earlier, 2/3 of these critical minerals. Between Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, we could be mass producers of component parts for semiconductors, component parts for microchips, solar panel parts. I forgot to include Chile in that. So what can we do to maximize this opportunity to build supply chains within the hemisphere to go global? We have a global market that we need to feed. So what we've done in the last 6 months, actually, and this is thanks to the amazing technical expertise of our teams, is we've been able to map out exactly what deposits we have in the region in key countries, the different capacities, because we've also noticed that different countries are at different levels of development given either their interest, their already nascent or incipient investment in these critical mineral production sectors, and then what we can do to protect these sectors so that we're abiding by what we all want, which is higher environmental standards for production, so that we are providing more problem to the carbon footprint or more issues to the carbon footprint problem that we already have. So we've got the mapping, we've got a diagnostic on what countries we want to focus on now. And now we're actually in the next stage, which is developing some early pilot projects. Because like I said, we're focused on developing pilots that can be scaled and then modeled elsewhere. See what production could look like with these countries abiding by environmental standards. This is a long-term vision. It's not an overnight, but we do have some early interest from private sector partners to look at Chile, for example, to look at Peru on what we could do, because there is a greater demand for solar panels, for example, and it's everywhere. So we're doing the work. I'm really happy to say that in the last 6 months, really, we've advanced significantly, and we're actually starting conversations with some governments to see what their interest is, obviously, in investing in these sectors, because again, it all comes down to jobs.
It does all come down to jobs and economic opportunity for sure. So we're almost out of time. It's amazing. I'm always blown away how these sessions, I enjoy them so much, if anyone noticed, and where they just fly on by. I want to end with the critical minerals, but I want to do what folks who come to La Jolla Conference and been here know I like to do, which is a yes or no question, but I'm going to do two-part. One is a country, and the second is yes or no. So Jessica, in the critical minerals, you talked about mapping. So what is, in your opinion, and this is a difficult, but this is an opinion, what country should we really be looking at as key in the critical mineral demand growth that we're seeing? And I don't want to just talk about lithium. I want to talk about, all of the various critical minerals. What country?
Just one?
I know. I'm never fair with these wrap ups.
I would say Brazil. I didn't mention them. Brazil's pretty advanced, and I think there's a lot of room for them.
And the second is the yes or no. See, these guys in the remote, they get it. They get to listen here. This is unfair, right?
Yeah, very.
It's unfair for the people in person in the hybrid format here. Is natural gas a transition fuel? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. So, thank you. Brazil? Yes. All right, let's see. Who goes first? I'm going to go to Jose Luis Manzano. Key country, where are you in terms of investment, putting your effort in critical minerals? What country?
We are focusing Argentina for lithium and copper. I think in Brazil, you can add to the lithium, you can add nickel.
Excellent. And is natural gas a transition fuel?
Of course. Ask the Poland.
Third option, of course. Wonderful. All right, Decio, key country, and I'm going to say you can't say Brazil.
Well, before saying Brazil, I would like to end with a note on the volatility.
Okay. Oh, we got to go back to volatility, huh?
No, yeah. Just one comment. For countries like Brazil or Argentina, developing countries, to the volatility in the commodity markets, we must add the volatility in the current exchange. So that's something that adds to the volatility. Well, no doubt Brazil. In addition to Brazil, I would say Argentina. And yes, of course, natural gas is a transition fuel.
All right, so we've got 2 votes for Brazil, we've got Argentina, and we have 3 yes. Well, 2 yeses, 1 of course. All right, Carlos de Regules, you kicked us off. Bring us home. What country, and yes or no?
Happy to do that. Okay, so what country? The country called the Organization of American States. That's the country. Yeah, that's the country that I would focus on. And for the second answer on natural gas being a transition fuel or not, I will bring in. I will put on my younger daughter's hat. Her name is Clara. She's 19 years old. And what would she respond? Definitely not.
My daughter Josie is 14, almost 15 tomorrow, and she would ask me, "What's natural gas?" So that probably is the answer. No. Generational. I think you made a comment earlier about Generation X. I don't know. I think I'm Generation X. I don't even know what that really is. What the cutoff, where it ends, where it begins. Who cares? So a round of applause. I think we can do that. Can we do that in the hybrid? Thank you to everyone who's joined us. We are here in the Malamud room at the Institute of the Americas in La Jolla, California. It's a gorgeous day. We're going to go enjoy it. Hopefully it's a wonderful day in Mexico, in Brazil, and in Argentina or DC, wherever we find it.
In DC, I'm in DC.
Thank you all to our virtual panel. Thank you to Jessica Bedoya again for joining us here. Tania, Miranda, check out the report Tania led, the NDC analysis. It's on our website. It's fantastic. Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Pleasure.
Bye-bye, pleasure.